The deep space station called Halo Point was not a glamorous posting. It sat far out on the edge of mapped space, quiet and cold, doing nothing exciting most of the time. The crew monitored signals, logged passing ships, and drank a lot of bad coffee. For Lieutenant Commander Nina Graves, it had been 8 months of almost total silence. She was good at her job, and her job rarely asked much of her. That changed on a Tuesday. She was sitting at her console when the signal came in. It did not knock. It did not announce itself. It simply arrived, tearing through every relay and scanner on the station, like something desperate and half-broken. Nina sat up straight. She had heard distress signals before. She had never heard one that sounded like this. The raw audio was almost painful to listen to. A voice, or something like a voice, repeating the same phrase over and over, in a language that the translation system struggled with for nearly 2 full minutes before it finally spat out an answer. "They are already inside. There is no time. Someone, please." Nina stared at those words on her screen. She read them 3 times. Then she started pulling the rest of the signal apart, layer by layer, looking for anything else buried underneath the voice. What she found made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Hidden inside the signal was raw sensor data, coordinates, ship readings, formation patterns. Whoever had sent this had packed as much information as they could into a single desperate transmission, knowing they might not get another chance. The data pointed to the Valorian cluster. It was home to 3 civilizations, the Aethori, the Duncel, and the Karath. They were quiet peoples, researchers and farmers and builders, and they had lived peacefully in their corner of space for as long as anyone had known them. What the sensor data showed, tearing through their systems right now, was not peaceful. It was a fleet, enormous, organized, and moving through the cluster the way fire moves through dry grass. Steady, unstoppable, deliberate. Nina ran the fleet profile against every database on the station. No match. These ships did not belong to any known civilization. They were not pirates. They were not a rogue faction that had broken off from somewhere. They were something new, and they fought in a way that suggested they had done this before, many times, on many worlds. She reported it up the chain immediately. Her station commander forwarded it to Earth's Joint Fleet Command within the hour. The signal and its data landed on the desk of Admiral Cole Harmon before noon. Cole was 57 years old. He was a quiet man who did not use many words when fewer would do. He had spent most of his career watching humanity's neighbors in the Galactic Cooperative treat Earth's large fleet as an embarrassment, something primitive and aggressive that a civilized species should have grown out of by now. He had spent those same years quietly making sure that fleet was ready. He looked at Nina's report for about 30 seconds. Then, he picked up the communication line to the Cooperative Council and explained what was happening in the Valorian cluster. The Council's senior coordinator told him they would convene an emergency session. She said it with the careful, measured tone of someone who had been convening emergency sessions for 40 years and had learned never to rush. Cole asked how long that would take. She said 72 hours, accounting for travel and quorum. Cole thanked her and hung up. He sat alone in his office for a moment. The Valorian cluster was roughly 9 days of travel from the nearest cooperative military asset. The attacking fleet in the sensor data was already deep inside the cluster's inner systems. He did the math in his head, the same way he had been doing it since he was a young officer. Simple, cold, honest math. 72 hours for a vote. 9 days of travel. 3 civilizations in the way. He picked up a different line. Commander Paul Delaney, his second-in-command, answered on the second ring. "Paul," Cole said, "put the fleet on standby. All of it." There was a short pause. Hall had known Cole for 22 years. He did not ask for clarification. "Yes, sir," he said. "All of it." The order moved fast. Across 17 Earth stations and 4 orbital platforms, warship crews were pulled from rest rotations, from training exercises, from shore leave. Engines that had been cold for months were brought to heat. Supply lines that existed only on paper were made real in a matter of hours. The men and women who crewed these ships did not all know yet what was happening. They knew that the admiral had given an order with a word they did not hear very often. All of it. Not a patrol, not a task force. All of it. Back on Halo Point, Nina Graves was still at her console. She had not left since the signal came in. She kept monitoring the Valorian cluster frequencies, hoping for more transmissions, dreading what she might hear. The cluster was getting quieter. That was the worst part. An hour after she had sent her report, there had been hundreds of signals, emergency broadcasts, civilian distress calls, military chatter in 3 different languages. Now there were fewer, and then fewer still. At some point, one of the junior officers brought her a cup of coffee. She thanked him without looking away from the screen. The signal that had started everything was still playing in a loop on a secondary monitor. The translated words sitting there in plain white text against the dark background. They are already inside. There is no time. Someone, please. She thought about the voice behind those words. She thought about whoever had sat down in the middle of something terrible and decided that the best use of their last few minutes was to pack as much useful information as possible into a single signal and throw it out into the dark, hoping something listening would understand and would come. She thought that was one of the bravest things she had ever heard of. Somewhere far below her, on a blue planet that most of the galaxy considered young and troublesome, 114 warships were warning their engines. The Cooperative Council met in a chamber that was designed to make everyone feel equal. The ceiling was high. The seats were arranged in a wide circle. Every civilization had the same size chair, the same size nameplate, the same amount of space. It was a beautiful room. It had not saved anyone yet. The emergency session began on schedule, 71 hours after Nina's signal reached Earth. Delegates from 32 civilizations sat in their places and listened to the full intelligence report. They saw the sensor data. They heard the translated distress call. Some of them looked sick. Some of them looked afraid. Some of them looked like they were already calculating what this crisis meant for their own borders, their own trade routes, their own elections. The Drathene ambassador, a tall reptilian named Voss Kareel, spoke first. His civilization had the second largest fleet in the cooperative, after humanity. He said that intervention was dangerous. He said that sending forces into the Valorian cluster could draw the unknown attackers toward the core systems. He said this carefully and seriously, with the tone of someone who believed he was being responsible. Several other delegates nodded. The Suuli sent their chief diplomat, a small gray-feathered being named Ayla, who suggested that the council attempt formal communication with the attacking force before any military action was taken. She said war was never the first answer. She said this with genuine feeling. No one pointed out that the Valorian cluster did not have time for first answers. The Merith observers said nothing. They never did. They abstained from every vote that touched on anything outside their home system, and they had done so for 200 years. It was their right, and they exercised it with remarkable consistency. Cole watched the session feed from his office at Joint Fleet Command. He had a mug of water in his hand that he had not drunk from in an hour. He watched the delegates talk. He watched the time. He had a document open on his desk, a very old document, printed on actual paper, which he had requested from the Cooperative Charter Archives 3 months ago, just in case. It was 40 pages long, and most of it was administrative language about trade agreements and membership fees. The part he cared about was on page 31. The Human Expeditionary Clause. It had been written by Earth's negotiating team when humanity joined the cooperative, and every other civilization at the table had thought it was embarrassing. It said that any member civilization could deploy military forces unilaterally, without a council vote, in response to what it called a genocide-level event. as long as that civilization accepted full responsibility for everything that followed. No shared liability, no cooperative backing. You go alone. You own it completely, good or bad. Every species at the table had assumed humanity would never actually use it. It sounded like the kind of clause a nervous, trigger-happy civilization puts into a treaty because it does not quite trust its neighbors. Maybe it was. Right now, it was the only working piece of machinery in the room. Cole signed the activation document, pressed his command seal to it, and transmitted it to the council secretary. Then he walked to the deployment center. Paul was waiting for him. "It's filed," Cole said. Paul nodded. "Crews are ready. We can move in 4 hours." 2, Cole said. The fleet left Earth's orbit in stages, each group peeling away from its station cleanly, forming up in open space like pieces of something much larger assembling themselves. 18 carrier platforms moved first, surrounded by escort destroyers. Then, the main body of warships, cruisers and battleships, and fast attack vessels, more firepower than Earth had ever sent anywhere in one column. Last came the Aegis line, 7 ships. They had no official names that anyone outside the military used. Everyone inside the military just called them by their numbers. They were the biggest things humanity had ever built, and they had never been deployed together outside of a simulation. Seeing them move in formation was unsettling even for the people who had built them. Nina had been transferred to the carrier Fort Davis by direct order. She stood on the bridge and watched the fleet form up around her ship through the forward viewport, and she felt something she did not have a clean word for. It was not exactly pride. It was something older than that. Something that had to do with the voice in the signal, with the people in the Valorian cluster, and with the fact that someone had decided to come. The council vote, when it finally happened, passed by a wide margin. It passed 4 minutes after the Armada entered faster-than-light transit. The Drathian ambassador, according to second-hand reports, stood at the viewport of the council chamber for a long time after the departure feeds went dark. No one recorded what he said. Whatever it was, he said it quietly. The Armada was already gone. It moved through the dark between stars, with the quiet, heavy purpose of something that had made up its mind, and did not need to discuss it further. 9 days to the Valorian cluster. Cole spent most of the first day reading everything Lucy Farrow had compiled about the attacking fleet. Lucy was the Armada's chief intelligence analyst, small and sharp-eyed, and almost always right. And she had been working without sleep since the signal first came in. "They're consistent," she told Cole during their first briefing. "Every engagement we have sensor data for, they fight the same way. Same formations, same timing. They expect the enemy to react predictably." She paused. "They haven't met us before." Cole considered that. "Let's make sure they remember the introduction," he said. The Armada dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Valorian cluster and ran straight into a graveyard. The debris field stretched for thousands of kilometers in every direction. Pieces of metal the size of buildings drifted in slow, quiet circles. Some of it still had lights on, blinking steadily in the dark because no one had told the emergency systems to stop. These were the remains of the Karath orbital defense grid. Dozens of platforms and gun stations that had once formed a protective shell around the cluster's outer systems. They were gone now, not defeated, dismantled. Cole gave the order to hold formation. For 20 minutes, the entire Armada drifted in silence through the wreckage. No one spoke on any of the open channels. There was nothing useful to say. The crew of the Fort Davis stood at their stations and looked at their screens, and understood, without needing a briefing, that whatever had done this was not something small. Lucy Farrow moved through the wreckage data faster than anyone else on the intelligence staff. She had a way of working that other analysts envied. She did not look for what she expected to find. She looked for what was strange. What was strange here was the order of destruction. The Kareth platforms had not been taken out by targeting their weapons first, the way any standard military doctrine would suggest. Their power generation cores had been hit first. Everything else had simply stopped working on its own. She brought this to Cole and laid it out plainly. If the enemy, which the human crew had taken to calling the Veil based on a word found in the fragmented Kareth transmissions, always targeted power first, then the Armada's standard combat posture was a problem. Human warships shared power across shields, weapons, and engines through a centralized distribution system. It was efficient. It was also exactly the kind of thing that became a catastrophic weakness the moment your power core took a hit. Cole pulled his senior staff into a meeting aboard the flagship, the Concordia Ridge, and they spent 6 hours rebuilding their engagement plan from the ground up. It was not comfortable work. Military doctrine is not supposed to be rewritten on a moving ship in enemy territory. But the people in that room were good at their jobs, and discomfort did not slow them down. By the time they were finished, every ship in the Armada had new standing orders covering power management, shield rotation, and fallback protocols. Cole sent the updated doctrine to every captain in the fleet, with a note that simply said, "Read this before we engage." On the second day inside the cluster, they found the living. A convoy of 6 Aethori ships appeared on the long-range sensors, moving slowly toward the cluster's edge. They were damaged. 2 of them barely held together, trailing atmosphere and debris, but they were moving. They carried approximately 40,000 civilians. When the Fort Davis hailed them, the Aethori captain responded immediately, his voice uneven and exhausted, his universal standard rough but understandable. He told them that the Veil had let them go. He said it with a kind of hollow horror, like a man describing something he still could not fully believe. The Veil had stopped firing on the convoy, pulled back, and watched them leave. He said they had done the same thing in 2 other engagements he knew of. Let a small group of survivors go, pointed outward, in the direction of cooperative space. He believed it was deliberate. He believed the Veil wanted word to spread. He believed the convoy was bait. He also said, very quietly, that he thought they might be bait for anyone who came to help. Cole looked at the convoy on his display screen. 40,000 people in 6 broken ships. He thought about what the Aethori captain had said. He thought about it for about 10 seconds. "We're going in," he said. "Fast and clean. Full escort formation around the convoy. Get them to the cluster edge and hand them to the supply ships." He looked at Paul. "And make sure every sensor in the area is recording. Whatever is watching us right now, I want them to see exactly what we do." Paul gave the order. The Armada moved around the convoy like a fist closing gently around something fragile. The rescue took 43 minutes. No ambush came. The Veil did not show themselves. But the Armada's sensors picked up faint readings at the edge of scanner range. Ships, many of them, sitting still and watching. They knew the humans were there now. And something in the Veil formation shifted in the hours that followed. Small movements, subtle changes in positioning. Lucy flagged them and brought them to Cole that evening. "They're adjusting," she said, pointing to the repositioned markers on the holographic display. "They had a plan for whoever showed up. They're changing it." Cole studied the display. "Good," he said. "That means they're paying attention." He straightened up and looked at the cluster's inner systems, where the last inhabited world still transmitting lay waiting. "Let's give them something worth paying attention to." Duncell Prime was a green and brown world, covered in forests and shallow seas, home to nearly 1 billion people. From a distance, it looked peaceful. Up close, it was surrounded. The Veil siege formation was unlike anything in the Cooperative's combat records. Enormous angular ships, dark and almost invisible against the star field, had arranged themselves in a wide arc around the planet. They absorbed scanner signals instead of reflecting them, which made them hard to count and harder to track. Lucy estimated somewhere between 80 and 100 vessels. The Concordia Ridge's tactical computer, working with the limited data it could gather, put the number at 93. Cole looked at the formation for a long moment, watching the way the Veil ships held their positions with almost mechanical precision. "They're waiting," Paul said beside him. "They're always waiting," Cole said. "They get into position. They cut the power, and they wait for the planet to run out of options." He turned to the tactical table. "We're not going to let them wait." The plan Cole gave his captains was not what any of them expected. He did not order a straight charge or a defensive screen. He split the Armada into 3 separate groups, each one operating under standing orders rather than real-time commands from the flagship. He explained why, in plain, simple language. In a real battle, communication gets cut, signals get jammed, and ships waiting for orders from a commander who can't reach them die while waiting. Each group knew what it was supposed to do. Each captain had the authority to make decisions. They were not going to fight like a machine waiting for instructions. They were going to fight like people who trusted each other. The Veil responded to the Armada's approach the way they had responded to everything else in the cluster, with controlled, organized precision. Their outer ships moved to intercept in tight, well-drilled formations. Their targeting was fast and accurate. In the first 10 minutes of the engagement, 3 human ships took serious hits, and one of the Aegis Line vessels lost 40% of its shielding. The Veil were not to be underestimated, but they were predictable. That was the thing Lucy had told Cole from the beginning, and it became clearer with every passing minute of the battle. The Veil fought beautifully, but they fought the same way every time. When a human ship pulled back, the Veil advanced to fill the space. When a human ship pushed forward, the Veil tightened their formation to meet it. They had a response to everything, as long as the enemy did what an enemy was supposed to do. Nina Graves was coordinating fighter wing operations from the Fort Davis when she noticed something. The Veil formation had a gap, not a big one, not something that would show up as a hole on any tactical display, but a soft point, a place where the command signals between their ships seemed to concentrate. Lucy had spotted the same thing from the intelligence side and flagged it 20 minutes into the battle, but the flag had not yet made it through the proper chain of command to anyone with the authority to act on it. Nina had the authority. She had 4 full fighter squadrons under her direct command at that moment, assigned to defensive screening duty on the Fort Davis's starboard side. Pulling them off that screen was not in the battle plan. It would leave the carrier exposed on one side. It was also exactly right, and she knew it, and she made the call. The 4 squadrons hit the Veil command node from a direction the enemy formation had not accounted for. The node was not heavily defended. Why would it be? It was deep inside their own formation, and it came apart fast. The effect moved through the Veil fleet like a crack moves through ice. Ships that had been moving in tight coordination suddenly hesitated. Gaps opened. The beautiful mechanical precision of the Veil formation stopped being beautiful and started being a liability, because ships that are trained to fight as a unit do not do well when the unit stops speaking to itself. Paul saw the gap open on the tactical display and did not wait for a second opinion. He took the Aegis Line ships in a direct charge straight through the center of the fracturing formation. It was a brutal, head-on attack that no textbook would recommend, and no reasonable opponent would expect. The Veil had clearly never seen anything do what the Aegis Line ships did: absorb fire that should have stopped them and keep moving forward, trading damage for distance, closing the gap through sheer determination. The Concordia Ridge took heavy damage. Its outer hull was breached in 2 places, and its secondary weapon system went offline. Cole stood on his bridge, with warning lights turning everything red, and gave calm, clear orders, and his crew carried them out. The Veil formation broke. It did not break all at once. It broke in sections, ships peeling away and trying to regroup, but the regrouping never quite came together, because the 3 human groups were everywhere now, aggressive and unpredictable, and utterly unwilling to stop. The Veil Armada began to pull back, slowly at first, then with more urgency. 3 human ships were gone. The Veil left behind 17 of their own vessels, destroyed or disabled, drifting in the space above Duncell Prime. On the planet's surface, 900 million people had been watching the battle through atmospheric sensors and observation networks. When the Veil ships began to withdraw, the transmission logs recorded a sound. A collective sound, rising from a billion throats, that had no clean translation in any language. Every species that later heard the recording understood it immediately. It was the sound of people who had believed they were going to die, and had just learned they were not. It was the most human sound imaginable, and it had not come from any human at all. The Veil did not surrender. They fell back to the outer edge of the Valorian cluster and stopped there, holding position just beyond scanner range, neither advancing nor leaving. Cole watched them on the long-range displays and let them sit. His armada had work to do, and chasing a retreating enemy into unknown space with a damaged fleet was not work. It was a mistake dressed up as bravery. He knew the difference. The 11 days that followed the battle were hard in a different way than the fighting had been. The fighting was loud and fast and left no room for thinking. The aftermath was slow and quiet and left too much. The human crew moved through the cluster system by system, looking for survivors, cataloging damage, trying to piece together what had happened to each of the 3 Valorian civilizations. They were badly hurt. Their homeworld had taken serious damage before the human fleet arrived, and they had lost a significant portion of their population. But they were alive as a people, and they still had leadership structures and communities and the basic machinery of a civilization that could be rebuilt. The Duncell were shaken down to their bones, their government in emergency session, their outer colonies dark, but Duncell Prime stood, and its people breathed. The Karath did not have the same story. They had been the first civilization the Veil hit, the first one struck, and the longest under attack. By the time the human armada reached their home system, there was almost nothing left. Lucy spent 3 days going through the data, and then brought Cole her final count, without decoration or softening. Fewer than 2 million Karath had survived. Their civilization had numbered in the billions. Their homeworld was uninhabitable. Their culture, their history, their language, most of it was gone. What remained were people in shelters, on generation ships, on allied worlds, carrying what they could remember. Cole read Lucy's report. He set it down on his desk and sat with it for a while. He held the memorial service for the 3 lost human ships 2 days after the fighting ended. Their names were the Ardent, the Galveston, and the Cape Horn. He did not give a speech. He stood at a podium in the Concordia Ridge's main hall, with every crew member who could be spared from duty standing in front of him, and he read every name from the crew manifests of the 3 ships aloud. He read them slowly, giving each name its own moment, not rushing. It took a long time. The hall was completely silent throughout. When he finished, he stepped away from the podium without another word, and no one felt that anything was missing. Nina found out about the memorial after the fact. She had been on duty, managing what remained of the fighter wings, and she asked a crew member to read her the names later. She sat in her bunk and listened to a recording of Cole's voice going through the list, and she thought about the fact that every name on that list had been a person who had gotten up that morning and done their job and trusted the person next to them. When the Armada finally turned back toward cooperative space, something was waiting for them at the border. It was not what anyone had expected. A fleet of Allied vessels sat in formation at the cluster's edge. Drathine warships, heavy and gray, in a column that would have taken an hour to count. Beside them were Suli medical transports, painted white with the cooperative's emergency markings. Behind those, 3 ships bearing the markings of the Marath, a civilization that had not deployed military vessels outside their home system in 200 years of recorded history. No one hailed anyone. No speeches were made. The Allied ships simply turned and fell into formation alongside the human armada, one on each side, and flew with them in silence. Cole stood at the viewport of the Concordia Ridge and watched the Drathene ships match his fleet's speed and hold position, and he did not say anything for a long time. The Cooperative Council session that followed was the most unusual one in the body's long history. The room that was designed to make everyone feel equal felt different somehow, smaller, more honest, less ceremonial. The Drathene ambassador, Vos Kareel, was the first to speak. He was not the same delegate who had argued carefully against intervention weeks before. He was that same person, but something in the way he carried himself had changed. He said that the Drathene had always believed humanity's large military was a sign of a civilization that had not yet matured, that was still caught up in old fears and old habits from a more primitive time. He said that he had spent the past 3 weeks trying to find a word in any language he knew for something that was dangerous and also kept you safe. He said he had not found one. He sat down. Cole was invited to address the council for the first time in his career. He kept it short. He said that Earth did not deploy the Armada to change anyone's opinion or to earn a different seat in the room. He said they deployed it because people were dying and humanity had the ships. He said that if it happened again, they would do the same thing again, and he genuinely hoped they never had to. He thanked the council for its time and walked back to his seat. Ayla, the Suli diplomat, who had asked for communication before military action, came to find Cole afterward in the corridor outside the chamber. She was small enough that she had to look up at him at a significant angle. She said that she still believed dialogue was the first answer. She said she also believed that some things came before dialogue, and that watching the human fleet move had taught her something about what those things were. She offered her hand in the human style, which she had clearly practiced. He shook it carefully. Back on the Fort Davis, which was docked for repairs at a cooperative station near the cluster border, Nina sat in the observation deck at the end of a very long day. The stars outside looked the same as they always had. She had been looking at stars her whole career, and they had always looked the same, distant, steady, indifferent. But something had changed that she could not quite point to. The way a room feels different after something important has happened in it, even after everything has been cleaned up and put back in its place. Lucy came and found her there, the way Lucy always seemed to find people when they needed to not be alone. She sat down in the seat next to Nina without making a production of it, and looked out at the stars with her. After a while, Lucy asked the question that had been sitting in both of their heads since the battle ended. "Do you think they'll come back?" She meant the Veil. Nina thought about it honestly. "Probably," she said, "but they know what's out here now." Outside the viewport, the Armada sat docked and still, 111 ships, scarred and patched and tired, lit by the soft glow of a repair station's running lights. They had gone somewhere dark and done something hard, and come back with their dead and their damaged and their heads up. They were not beautiful the way they had been when they left. They were better than beautiful. They were real. Somewhere in the dark beyond the cluster's edge, the Veil were watching. Maybe they were thinking. Maybe they were planning. Maybe they were telling each other the story of what they had found in the Valorian cluster. Not a slow, weak civilization that could be frightened into stepping aside, but something they had never encountered before and did not have a clean word for. A species that crossed the dark because someone had asked.